Hello, welcome to the channel. In today's video, we're going to talk about a brand new capability that's in preview. And this is the ability to go ahead and create MCP servers from Logic Apps using the API Center discovery experience. Let's go. All right, let's talk a little bit about Model Context Protocol, otherwise known as MCP. For those of you who may not be as familiar with that term, it is an open protocol that enables seamless integration between large language model applications and your tools and data sources. Now, whenever we think about data sources, there's an element of connectivity that's required. And that's really where Logic Apps shines with our connector library that includes more than 1,400 different connectors that allow you to connect to APIs, file systems, databases, AI models, and much more. So if we think about the opportunity to leverage Azure Logic Apps and Azure Integration Services, customers can create composable architectures quite quickly that enable MCP tools to be discovered and consumed. Now, one of the earlier challenges with MCP is security. And it continues to be a top concern. And naturally, whenever you have a large group of organizations coming together trying to establish a common standard, there's naturally going to be some differences and different opinions in terms of how security should be implemented. Now, we wanted to make sure that whatever we were providing customers here was secure by default, and that we built up our stack leveraging strong security posture while still conforming to the open standards as well. And so with this in mind, we do offer Entra ID and easy auth authentication, and we will simplify securing your MCP servers when you go through our experiences. Now, we do offer MCP support in a couple different ways at this point. The first is API Center integration, and that's going to be the focus of this video. And then we also support natively, so inside of Logic Apps, you can also enable that Logic App to become an MCP server, and that will be a subsequent video on the channel that you can go ahead and look for. So if we think about API Center, and maybe let's take a step back for those of you that may not be as familiar with API Center. So API Center is an Azure capability, Azure service, that allows you to go ahead and manage, govern, and catalog your API assets. And this is historically sort of the positioning of it, and now we're starting to see more and more different assets or asset types being supported. So there's a natural extension here of, hey, I want to go ahead and manage and govern my APIs. Well, MCP servers kind of have similar needs from that perspective as well. So the API Center team has been working on the ability to easily and quickly register different MCP servers. And sometimes these are existing endpoints such as like Microsoft Docs, or could be other third-party services as you see here on the screen. But what's new is the Logic Apps connectors tile that will allow you to go ahead and quickly provision a Logic App MCP server. And one of the ways that your MCP server becomes discoverable is after going through this wizard, we will actually go ahead and register your MCP server so that it's available both for administrators that are in the Azure portal and in this experience, but also for developers who may want to consume your MCP server through the API portal. So I'll show you that as part of the demo as well. But that's a huge opportunity here as well. No one likes to reinvent the wheel. So naturally, as you build an MCP server, how do you go ahead and make it discoverable for the rest of your organization as well? Now, we are going to enable you to dynamically create these MCP servers based upon our Logic App connectors. Now, for now, these are going to be our Azure managed connectors. In the future, we will be supporting both service providers, the built-in connectors, and also custom connectors as well. Now, the experience starts by clicking on that register tile. Then you will be asked to select an empty Logic App. Now, this is a temporary constraint We are working on both the ability to create a logic app inline, but also to support existing logic apps where you may have existing workflows as well. But for now, it does need to be an empty logic app. You'll be able to go ahead and search for a particular connector. And once you've gone ahead and selected that connector, you will have the ability to select one or more actions. Now, for each of these actions, a corresponding workflow will get created. And as part of that workflow being created, you will see an HTTP request trigger. That request trigger will have a description. And we will also provide a schema as part of that request payload in that particular trigger, including things like descriptions as well. These become hugely important as we think about agents that want to consume our MCP tools. We need to support discoverability by making sure this type of data is populated. Now, we will also do the heavy lifting around security when you use this wizard. So we will go ahead and create an app registration for you. We will also go ahead and configure Easy Auth so that when you go ahead and use this by default, it will be using OAuth 2 from an authentication standpoint. So let's go ahead and let's dive into a demo. All right, so I'm in API Center. Now, for those of you that are new to API Center, you might be wondering, okay, how do I go about this? How does it cost? Things like that. So you can go ahead and provision this in the Azure portal, just like any other resource itself. You can go ahead and use the free trial, the free tier. It is positioned as a trial, but that's actually not the case anymore. It is in time box for 90 days. So you can validate that inside of the documentation for API Center. You should find it there. The free tier will go ahead and let you manage up to 200 APIs. And certainly that's plenty when you think about getting started. Beyond the 200, if you have needs beyond 200, then naturally you could go ahead and go to a higher tier, and naturally there'll be some costs associated with that. So I am in the Azure portal, I am in API Center, and I can go ahead under the Discovery tab, see this MCP preview, and now I see all of those different tiles that we saw in the slides. So I'm going to go ahead and select Azure Logic Apps. Now, today what we're going to do is build an MCP server for SalesForce that helps us with our opportunities and our contacts and basically some of the sales management stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and select a logic app. Now, in this case, it's looking for empty logic apps that are found in the same subscription as API Center that you're using. So just be aware of that. For now, it does have to be empty. That is a short-term requirement. We will be fixing that in the near future. Now I'm going to go ahead and look at connectors. So you should find all of our Azure managed connectors that are here. In particular, we're going to look at SalesForce today, but if we wanted to go look at Office, we would find it there. ServiceNow would be another one that is available here. What you won't find is the service providers, the built-ins, nor will you find custom connectors at this point, but those are on our roadmap as well. So let's go ahead and find SalesForce. So we've got SalesForce here. Now we can choose one or more different actions. We're going to go ahead and look at create record. We are also going to go ahead and get account records. We are going to have update records, and we are also going to go ahead and have opportunity records too. So we'll go ahead and select these four. Now, next up, we will be prompted to create a connection or select a connection if one already exists. So I already have one in this logic app, so I don't need to go through that process. But if I did, I'd click add new and life would be good. So we'll go ahead and hit save. Now, we're not completely done here. So connectors are kind of interesting, especially some of these more popular, more sophisticated connectors for SaaS systems like Salesforce, ServiceNow, SharePoint, Dynamics, Dataverse, etc. And the reason for them is that you have these general operations that exist. When we see create record, that's an example of one. So we need to go ahead and set this up. And the reason for this is that we've got a Salesforce object type here. Now, yes, models can be pretty interactive and pretty dynamic, but here, if we want to be able to create data, we need to know what the shape of that data is going to be in order for that call to take place. So if we go ahead and have contacts, right, as our entity that we're interested in, there's going to be a subsequent shape of a request that needs to be determined for this to actually work, right? So in this case, we do want to have a user-provided Salesforce object type. So this is going to be pre-configured in advance. But then there's going to be other properties that are going to be dynamic that we do want to get fed from the model or from the user. And so same thing with optional parameters. There's going to be some additional values here that we want to go ahead and select. So things like the contact email, the first name, we already had last name there, but the city might be another one, right? So these are all examples of parameters that we want to be included in our payload. So we're going to leave all of these dynamic, and these are all going to be model. Now, if we wanted to hard code something, we could, but in this case, it doesn't make sense for our scenario. So we'll go ahead and do that. Now, not all of our actions will need to be configured. Like this one is just getting all the account records. But if we did want to have filters, we could go ahead and include those here. Not necessarily for our use case. But then once again, when we get into the update record one, that is another scenario where we do want to go ahead and configure this. So in this case, we're going to want to go ahead and update opportunities. So that's going to be a user-provided entry. And then we're going to see that there's some of these existing properties that are expected to be included. And so we'll go ahead and have these ones by default listed. But then we also want to make sure we're updating the opportunity probability. And so once again, that will be something we add, and we go ahead and say it's going to be provided by the model, or in this case, the user. At this point, we're good to go. Like everything is pre-configured. We're going to hit this register button. And then we're going to see some notifications up in the upper right-hand corner. Now, what's happening under the hood right now is we are updating that logic app. We are creating those workflows. We are creating those schemas and pre-wiring everything for you. The other thing that we're doing is we are registering your MCP server in the API portal as well. So, okay, what's the API portal? So if we head down to API Center Portal Preview, then we click on Settings, and there is some setup required here. And then do look at their docs. They do talk about this. That'd be the best sort of course of action. But once you've got it configured, you can go ahead and click on this View API Center portal. You will need to log in. There's also a specific role that your end users will need to be part of. I believe it's like an API Center data reader role. But once again, confirm with their docs on that one. Then we'll go in and we can see SalesForce. And we will give you the ability to override these names in the future, but just be aware of that. And then you can go ahead and copy the URL. And so this is something that we will use when we go ahead and run this. Before we run it though, let's take a closer look at what's happening inside of Logic Apps. So this was the Logic app that we did specify. And what you can now see is that for each of those actions that were configured, we have a corresponding workflow for them. So let's take a look at the create record one. So this was the related to contacts, if you recall. And so what we've got here is just like a request trigger. Now, as part of that request trigger, we do have a description. Now, this comes from the API spec of the Salesforce connector, so that's where that comes from. You could override that in the previous experience, but we're defaulting this. The other thing you'll now see is that we are pre-populating the request trigger. So this is all based upon the configurations that we made in the wizard. So we made sure that we had a first name and an email and a city, and that's why these are all showing up here. And then there was that default, the last name is a required field, so it's annotated with that. And then what we do is in the actual action itself, we do this mapping for you. So this is a great way, like if you think about it, we created 4 MCP tools, so 4 workflows, and wired all of this up for you quite quickly. So that's pretty cool in my mind. So that's where all of these different workflows are created. Now, the other thing, and you're going to see this when we run the demo, is we get authenticated. So what happens there? Now, what's going on under the hood is that we have enabled authentication. Inside of authentication, what we've done is set up Easy Auth. Now, there's a couple things that do happen for easy auth. Number one is that an app registration takes place, and that's what you can see that's happened here. If we go ahead and click on it, this is an app registration that was created as part of that wizard, and there's kind of a couple settings that are going on here. One, it's just a user.read for graph from a permissions perspective, and then what we do is we expose an API, and so in this case we create a scope, and basically it's available for admins and users, and this is what's going to show up when we get asked for consent. In this case, we are allowing users to consent, but that's the default setting. You can make changes if you see fit from that perspective. Now, back in our Logic app, the other thing that we do set up here is if we go ahead and edit this, these are really the easy auth settings. So we're going to go ahead and establish an issuer, which is going to be basically your tenant. And then we've got the application client ID pre-wired up. And then there's additional checks that take place. So you have some control here. Like if you know that you've got specific client applications where this is going to be called from, you can go ahead and select this and basically put in that client application registration. Same thing if you want to restrict which identities can go ahead and call this, that would be another control. So you've got authentication in place. This would really be the authorization. If you had specific users that you want to enable calling this MCP server, you could go ahead and override that as well. So this is some of the underlying configuration that takes place when you go ahead and run that particular wizard. So let's now go ahead and grab that URL from the API portal. And we're going to just use VS Code as a way to go ahead and interact with our MCP server. Now, in theory, this can really be any agent, but Copilot, GitHub Copilot, and VS Code offer an easy way to go ahead and wire this up and call it, so hence we're using that experience. All right, so I've got VS Code here, and I'm running just the latest version. And earlier this summer, the MCP capabilities were included by default, so you shouldn't have to install a whole lot of software there to get this running. Now, we want to go into the command palette. We want to select MCP add server, so we'll go ahead and do that. Then we'll select HTTP or SSE events. We'll provide the URL that we grabbed from the API portal. And we'll just hit enter, and then we're going to need to provide a meaningful name. So I'm just going to call this SalesForce Sales Agent. So we'll go ahead and select that. Now what we're going to see is that we've got it added, and we're being asked to go ahead and authenticate because it's already started to run. So we're going to go ahead and log in with our credentials. So that's taken place, and we've got GitHub Copilot open here now. We're in agent mode. That's important. You won't find this if you're in ask mode. And then we can go ahead and click on this configure tools, do a search for SalesForce, and we will see that we've got our sales agent, and we've got the 4 tools available to us here as well. So that's great news. We're up to a great start. So our scenario is that we're got a deal going on with Contoso Construction, and we've got an opportunity, and we've recently learned that there's a new person that works for them, a manager named Steve Smith, who we feel could potentially impact or help our deal along. So we're just going to do some typical sort of contact and sales management by using this particular agent. So let's start by bringing up the Contoso account. All right, so here we're going to go ahead and call the tool that will get account records from SalesForce. Now what's kind of interesting here is like we didn't specify a filter on Contoso Construction. So in this case, the call's being made to SalesForce for all of the accounts, and then basically the large language model is actually filtering out just the result that we're interested in. Naturally, we could tweak that to have a filter. So if you had a really large data set, you probably want to do that, but pretty cool that like it just did it on its own without further instructions. So now our meeting with Steve went well, and we want to be able to link Steve to this account as a contact. So we can now ask our agent to go ahead and do that. So we're just going to say add Steve Smith to the account. His email address is this, his city is Seattle. Now, when we said link him to Contoso Construction, that's important, right? Because now we need to make sure that there's an account ID reference that's associated in his contact record. Now, it automatically went and got this because we had previously looked up the Contoso Construction information. So here we've got the remaining parameters mapped, so we can just go ahead and click OK here. So this should now go ahead and run, and it says that it's been successfully added. Well, let's flip over to SalesForce and see if this is true. All right, so over in SalesForce, we're in the Contoso Construction account. Let's just do a little refresh here. And sure enough, we see Steve Smith with the appropriate email address. So, okay, we're off to a good start. Let's now head back to VS Code and finish the scenario. All right, so let's say we've got an opportunity that is open with Contoso Construction for August 2025. Now let's see what happens here when we go ahead and ask for any opportunities for Contoso Construction. All right, cool. Looks like we do have one, and it's set to close August 22nd, and the probability is currently set to 86%. Now, our meeting with Steve went really well, and we feel like he's going to help us unlock this deal. So as a result, let's go ahead and update this opportunity, and let's set the opportunity percentage to be 94%. Okay, so we can see that all the information is still there. Probability has now been set to 94. It's exactly what we want. So let's go ahead and click OK here. All right, so it says it's been updated. Let's go check it out. Let's head back to SalesForce. Okay, so we're still in that Contoso Construction account. We've got the opportunity loaded below here. And sure enough, we can now see that the probability has been set to 94%. So this concludes this particular demo where I kind of go the full gamut when it comes to API Center and setting this up using Logic Apps and the SalesForce connector. And so look for some additional content coming soon. I'm going to have some additional use cases, some other popular connectors. I always like doing stuff with ServiceNow, so that'll probably be one of them. And then the other plan I do have is to take an existing Logic app and expose it as an MCP server by doing some of that wiring using the host.json and the app registration. But one thing I would consider is that API Center is a huge accelerator. So you can always use API Center to accelerate the development of this, get kind of say your core actions sorted out there, and you can always add to it. So once you've got all of this wired up, you can go in and just add workflows. And as long as those workflows have the request trigger and a corresponding response action, you should be good, and those should show up as additional tools. But do remember, go ahead and update the trigger description, go ahead and update the trigger payload so that you have descriptions there too. That'll only make running your agents and your MCP tools even more effective and efficient. So thanks for checking this video out. I hope you enjoy it. Thanks. Bye.